Hi, inspired by some discussion on social media, I decided to record a video and describe kind of a workflow that I use to work on web applications in Rust. That suits me very well. I'm not exactly a web developer, and usually the things I do with web pages are uh, very straightforward. Um, but I think some people might consider some of the stuff I show here and adopt it in their workflows. To make this easier, I'm going to start with a working application that I've been building. I have a little project called Rostra. It's a larger thing. It's mostly focused around peer-to-peer communication, social media stuff. But one of the craze there is a Axum server with a web application using Htmx and mount for templating. So I'm gonna show you around a little bit. Well, maybe not around, but we're going to use it as our starting point because I don't want to build a whole new thing because that's a lot of boilerplate. So you can see this is the router here. We defined the routes this web application has and can jump to code handling them. I'm not gonna kind of get into detail of Axum. It's pretty popular, so hopefully you already know it. I've added a ad hoc route here. Yeah, but maybe let's start this thing first. So I have a just command that kind of uses cargo watch to automatically rebuild and restart the application. I'll talk about it later, how to make this super fast and super smooth. So a lot of people kind of complain about Rust being slow because they don't do things very optimally and hope that some magic is gonna make everything fast. So yeah, if everything is okay, we should get this application starting on here. Yeah, we can even try to log in just to show more or less that this thing is kind of working. Kind of like Twitter. I'm not gonna be talking too much about what it does. Here I added a custom route just so we can start with something more like a from scratch. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So this is just an empty route. How do you do it? All right. I haven't been working on it for a couple of months at this point, so I'll be a little bit rusty with what I'm doing. Don't expect too much. What is it? All response. Or okay, yeah, you'll see. Let's jump to the code. All right, let's focus just on this part. So this is just a simple Axum handler, just a standalone function. It returns kind of a custom result type because in this application I'm doing some error handling magic that converts it automatically to error code, stuff like that. And notably this mount thing, which is just a wrapper around mount markup to send it as a response, kind of a little bit of utility one-time thing. And I don't know how much I want to get into mount. Like the mount is just a templating system, but importantly, it is making every bit of rendered output a straightforward Rust value. And I think that's most what I like about it. Because I see from a lot of what people use, they introduce some kind of a templating systems, kind of like Ninja or Jinja or whatever the names were, and they for no good reason introduce a whole new surface layer, whole new syntax, whole new programming language just to have to deal with HTML again, which I find kind of daunting. Just a bad idea. I don't know how else to say it. While in mouth, I can just write a little bit of a syntax. I mean, it maps one-to-one to HTML. In my opinion, it's nicer and easier to use. But let's say I want to use it somewhere in my code. I can say I probably don't even need this string, but I can do stuff like that's how we do it. Okay. All right. Does this work? I get automatic kind of completion, even though it's a macro in Rust, so it's not exactly native syntax, and sometimes things like indentation. Let's see. Yeah, indentation doesn't work off the bat. Yeah, in a perfect world, this wouldn't be a macro. I had some prototypes to make this happen, but Rust is not a language that yield itself to kind of abusing it as a DSL. So probably macro like this is the best thing we can do. But yeah, if everything is right, the cargo watch reloaded it, and yeah, and now I'm interacting with Rust code very flexibly. I can mix Rust and Maude ad hoc as I please. And let's say I'm writing a blogging system, and I would like to make sure that every post looks kind of the same. So I can do something like title and then content, and then I can return markup, and I can do HTML. And let's say, it has to have some class like blog post, right? And then I want to give it a title, and then I don't know, I'm like, you can do tailwind here and paste in 30 lines of utility classes, and you don't have to repeat it. And then let's say content, right? And now instead of doing this kind of like this, I can do post, hi and hello. Even I could do probably like this, right? Is this working? Blah, 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 blah. Ah, right, because this is actually because this has to be a markup. So let's say content, and I need to make it HTML, and Rust needs to be inside the macro, needs to be like this. Okay. Did it work? Yep, let's see. There we go. Also notice that as soon as I saved, I refreshed the page and I didn't wait for anything. It's like people complain about compilation speed, but if you make your web interface a separate crate and you mind your dependencies in your project, and then you use the trick, especially with a system FD, maybe I'll get into it later. This reloading, rebuilding everything in a second. So by the time I get to this window, it's already rendered. And also thanks to the system FD, the connection to the web application is transferred under the hood. So the web application doesn't even need to kind of lose all the connectivity. though the server will restart there. So that's a different thing. So then, continuing on that thread, you probably don't want to render just a little bit of HTML. Typically, you want to render a whole page. So here I copied from and kind of adapted from my existing code. Render HTML head and render HTML page. And that already, includes all like the HTMX, CSS, favicon. So I can do, what is it, like, let's move it here, let the page content, let's maybe rename this as post content just to make it clear, and then render HTML page. Title is gonna be my blog, and this is gonna be page content, right? What happened? Oh, no, this should. Oh, is this async? No. Oh, it is async. Okay, that's my bad, because I took it from a place that actually needed this to be async, which it can. You can add a wait there. But here we're not gonna use that. Is it? Oh, and it's a result. Okay. So we need the question mark. Right, there we go. Now we're ready to render the whole page. Not exactly. Do you see a CSS there, right? And I don't have to write any HTML. And I know this HTML here is kind of correct because the mouth already made sure that kind of the rendered HTML has tags, opening and closing tags matching, etc. And yeah, and thanks to this, I can build utility functions as small, as big as I want. I can mix, just like here, I'm injecting existing markup to render it as a part of a larger markup, but on the kind of opposite way, I can render markup from Rust code. So the interplay between Rust and rendered page is very fluent, and I don't need any separate templating. And in context of Htmx, the person I was responding to was worrying that with Htmx one would need a lot of templates, because for every little things you're updating with Htmx, you would need a separate template. But with something like Mount, like the templates, standalone template documents are kind of a self-inflicted wound that is completely unnecessary. So I find working with Maud very useful, and like good, like it's a great pair for how Rust works, and that would be my recommendation. And yeah, with Htmx, I could here, I'm not gonna type it all in, but here we could have some extractor that is like is Htmx Htmx can't type, sorry. Htmx, and then if is Htmx request, then I would, for example, return just the page content. But if this is a normal request, then we would render a whole page, right? And yeah, the kind of returning fragments in that HTMX needs to update pieces of page is very straightforward. And in my little application that I was showing there, I use it all the time, and it works it works great. Yeah, so that would be my, okay, yeah, now it's like it's not gonna compile. Yeah, let's get back to where we were. Another thing that I probably want to talk about is the systemfd thing. So let's look at the just file, custom just. So I have this command that is a dev command. You give it a port. Just is kind of a useful command runner that I tend to use. And what is it is a little bit complicated here because I set environment variables for enabling certain things useful in development, set logging for us, and then I wrap it all in the systemfd. And what systemfd does is it will, instead of having this application opening its own port and binding it every time, it will bind it once and then pass it over anytime the server is being restarted, which means the socket, like frequently restarting this application, is not going to cause any issues with ports not being able to rebind at the same time as the old applications, etc. Yeah, we'll take a look at the code that handles it. There's a little bit of code one needs to do inside the Axum itself. Actually, let's actually look at it now before I forget. Where is that? Let's look for bind maybe. Yeah. So you need this create listen fd. Is it listen fd? Yeah, listen fd. You can see it right here. To kind of detect that your application will be able to detect that it's running inside systemfd and it's being passed a socket instead of opening and binding its new one. Yeah, so not too complicated, though I do some customization here that I will not be getting into. And then back to this dev command, there's the cargo watch, and it, with a delay of 0.1 seconds, it's going to rebuild my application and restart. What does it do? Yeah, it does the build and then the running separately here for whatever reason I forgot. Yeah, and ignores a couple of paths that, like, the assets are things like CSS can be reloaded from the disk, picking up the updates automatically, so no need to rebuild the whole application just because I changed the CSS file. Yeah, let's see if I wanted to talk about something else here. All right, the last point is more general in Rust, but people complain about rebuild times because they stuff everything into one big crate, and then when they touch anything, the Rust compiler needs to rebuild almost everything. So it's very important in Rust to split your project into as many crates as architecturally it makes sense. That would be how I would describe it. In my case, I have separate utility crates for errors, for different functionality, and client, server, APIs. It actually makes the structure of a code way better when you spend some time thinking through how to split your project. But importantly, your build time can be greatly improved. So thanks to the fact that the web UI is in a separate crate, let's look at the web UI cargo. When I play just with the UI, which is pretty common, I only need to rebuild the UI code, and then it's just linking, and the application is done. I also use wild linker here, which is way faster than a standard Rust linker. So that's another, half a second here, half a second there. Another thing that I don't use in this project, but I sometimes employ, is I will introduce dynamic dispatch between the server and the UI code. So I will inject the server, no, the other way. I will inject the UI, web UI, with a dynamic dispatch object implementing a trait that is an interface between the UI and the rest of the application. I don't know if I can kind of describe it without making this too long and confusing, but the web application would have a separate crate that defines some kind of a trait server API, and then anything that the web application needs from the server would be a method here. So get blog posts, right? And then that would return me a list of some kind of blog post structures, blog post, etc. And this way, the web UI does not need to depend on the backend code. It only knows that there is this functionality, and as long as this trait doesn't change, the web UI does not need to be rebuilt when the implementation under the hood works. And this way, you don't need to rebuild the web UI when you change the backend code. So then when you're iterating over your kind of business logic, you skip compiling the UI. And that's also a savings, which when you iterate over the project and you want to check something quickly here, saves 100 milliseconds or something like that. So when working on a Rust project, I highly recommend thinking if on high level it's possible to decouple two crates. So think about it this way: if you have a crate A that crate B needs to know about, anytime you change the crate A, the code in A, you need to rebuild A, and then you need to rebuild B. So what you do is introduce kind of a interface crate that only has this trait, and then B depends on that interface, and how to draw it nice, like this. And then A implements this interface and AI, and at the highest level on the crate that creates the binary and the main function, you glue them together. So changes in those do not require rebuilding the other crate. And in a large project with a lot of code, if you can modularize it this way, you can have hundreds of thousands of lines of code and still have rebuilds of a couple of seconds. And I am working on a project like that. I'm not going to be getting into it now, and because it's so big, it's kind of harder to show. But this technique is very valuable there. Yeah, and thanks to this, working on a web application does not feel any slower in Rust than working in it in like scripting language, like let's say Ruby. Yeah. Anyway, I guess that's it. That's all I had to show. If you have any, I know this is a lot of rambling, and I'm not editing these videos because I don't care. I don't have enough time for making this polished. Yeah, if you have any questions, leave a comment or something, and maybe I'll follow up on this, or I will respond in a comment. Thanks.